Director of Marketing Communications here at Symmetry, and I will be moderating today's live session. We really appreciate you all taking time out of your busy schedule to learn more about SAP HANA, and we hope to answer all of your questions today. We will be getting started shortly, but first I wanted to go over a few housekeeping notes. Only our presenters' phones are live. Your phone has been muted to block any background noise. And our presenters will be answering attendee questions at the end of today's webinar, so we'll be typing in the Q&A function at that time, and we'll get to all your questions shortly. So now I would like to introduce today's SAP HANA experts. We have Kevin Kniese, who is the Chief Technology Officer here at Symmetry Corporation, and Jim Lacano, who is the Business Critical Systems Specialist for HPE. Both are recognized as leading SAP HANA experts and have custom-built Symmetry's enterprise SAP HANA cloud solution that's powered by HPE. Symmetry and HPE are considered the leaders in SAP HANA technology. Both Symmetry and our consultants are SAP HANA certified and are actively managing SAP HANA solutions for our customers today. We look forward to receiving a lot of great information from both Kevin and Jim in today's webinar. So let's get started. Kevin and Jim, are you there?
We're here, thank you.
Awesome. So the first question today, what are the primary points of value I can expect to receive by moving to SAP HANA?
So I'll start off. This is Kevin speaking. So from the standpoint of what HANA is really designed to do, ideally we're focused on a solution that is designed for the purest and the greatest performance. So as SAP has grown, databases has grown, applications change, things get more complex, transactions seem to take longer and longer periods of time. So SAP really wanted to drive performance back into their solution. I think another really important characteristic about why, what's driving HANA and the decision to move to HANA is the fact that depending on how you use it, but in just about every circumstance, you have access to real-time data. So whether you're using HANA for transactional systems or you're using HANA for analytics, the access to real-time data really affords itself to the opportunity of making better decisions, whether you're manufacturing, whether you're doing sales distribution, whether you want to know what's in your inventory, you name it, you have access to real-time data, and therefore the ability as a decision maker to make a more accurate decision for your organization. Some of the other things that are really important are really that HANA is the next phase, the direction that SAP is focused on going. So, today you see their literature really focus and talk about any data, any database, and the reality is going forward, the future down the road is going to be database of HANA. And so today, the support model, the focus of the development at SAP, all that is really focused on what's best and how do I make HANA better and how do I focus on creating a patch that is going to satisfy a particular requirement. So the direction of SAP is really towards HANA. And I think that being said, one of the final topics, and I'll turn over to Jim here a little bit, but one of the final topics is really, from the standpoint of functionality, whether it's new features or functionality that is being developed, is really being developed potentially for HANA only, right? So there may or may not be the ability to run certain transactions they run today down the road because there's newer, faster, better means, better way to do that with HANA. So, the features and functions are being adapted to HANA as the solution.
And I would agree with that. This is Jim, so I'll just tag on to what Kevin said. I think the first point of value is that moving forward, as we're using S4 as the next generation release from SAP, all new functionality comes out with HANA as a database. So if you want new functionality in SAP, moving forward, it all comes out in S4, and HANA is your choice, the one choice you can choose. So that's a key point of value, because the only enhancements come from HANA. The other thing is, and this has been marketed since HANA was just a thought instead of a reality as it is now, is that the art of the possible is here. And so you look at some of the patches that were made along the years with the SAP trail from an ERP perspective, from an overall ERP software perspective. You see things like BW came about to patch some of the shortcomings of the transactional systems reporting. So what you have now is the enhancement of giving you the art of the possible where it was not possible before. And you could look at that from a simple, well, I'll use the word simple finance since I started with the word simple. Simple finance is one of the first modules available out on S4. And that is giving you the capability of closing the books faster than you ever did before by aggregating a larger number of transactions and processing them faster. If you move it down into manufacturing and you look at things like MRP runs, which typically are run in batch and only once in a while, you're starting to see MRP take all of the population of sales orders and purchase orders and manufacturing orders and reprioritizing them in real time as opposed to in batch. A much different concept from what we've ever been used to in ERP before. So those two things, I think, are the art of the possible, and then to recap what Kevin said, all new functionality comes out on HANA.
Great. Awesome. Let's move on to the next question. How does an SAP HANA migration differ from past SAP upgrades and migrations?
This is a great question. I've heard all sorts of concerns and comments and really reasons why companies are putting off or have not migrated to HANA as of yet. You know, things are all over the board, from licensing changes, from comfortable with the way things are, to the migration is way too scary to use I guess maybe not a technical term, but really because HANA is a different way of thinking of how a database works, and you can't touch memory per se or data in memory. It's an adaptation, it's a change, and so there's concerns or hesitation on jumping into the project of doing a migration. And quite frankly, the concern about a project is sometimes represents downtime or complexity or hours that the same individuals that have a day job have to do in addition to their day-to-day activities. And so I guess part of the way to answer that is the migration to HANA is really not any more complicated than a migration to any other platform that has occurred in the past. So the projects that many customers have exercised and gone down and gone through in the past are not really all that much different. The things like the pre-checks or the setting the stage and preparing your existing environment, getting things to the right SPS level or EHP level, preparing the OS, preparing the database, doing all the things that you normally do as preliminary checks and requirements for projects gone by. Those are still required for a HANA migration. Likewise, the process, has a phased approach. It's very much, I guess, the same as any other migration in the past. And then certainly, post-processing has the same look and feel. You're going to have to validate that all the data is intact. You're going to have to, investigate any transports or modifications or changes that you made in the system are still valid and still operate. And then, of course, you're going to have to do the additional adjustments in order to optimize HANA for the use that you intended for. So the project itself is pretty much the same. And granted, there's always variations, and certainly for each customer or what your target is always going to represent some sort of variation in the overall project. But the baseline of those projects is pretty much the same. And certainly, because HANA has been around and because the primary focal point for SAP, it's a well-defined process at this point. So that should not be an inhibitor for companies to start their migration projects. Jim?
And I'll tag on to that again, and I'm going to approach it from the hardware perspective as we talk about migrations. And I'll say the tools are different between what you do in HANA from a migration perspective. For example, what you have for memory and persistence layer is different. Obviously, everything that's copied from memory needs to be kept in the persistence layer. Roughly the same amount of storage is required, but the tool sets are different. Software-based replication supported throughout from SAP to do replication is different from what people were doing on spinning disk before. And the second part of the tools being different is there's hard, fast rules that change frequently because SAP is still controlling this pretty close to the hip with regard to what you can do in production and still get support from them from. So we can get into that, and that, you know, that's whether it's, we'll get into the next questions about appliance and TDI and those types of things. But if you look at the inception of HANA and the Westmere chip from Intel in 2013, for 4 sockets, you could only, in analytics, you could only do a ½ terabyte of memory. And now as we progress up through Ivy Bridge and Haswell, and even the latest release from Haswell on SBS 11, we can now go up to 2 terabytes in the same hardware footprint. And you can kind of see that because of its relative infancy in the SAP world, HANA is being held very close by SAP to make sure that performance is always there when people make that migration. So I think they've done a good job of that. Our customers are happy with it, and I just see it as, because it's young enough, you don't get the myriad of choices you had on spinning disk.
Sure. And really, it's one of those scenarios where, from the perspective of project and direction, you know, certainly by all means, give us a call, and collectively we'll put together a roadmap that's specific for you and kind of walk you through what the exercise is going to look and feel like, and point out these specifics along the way. Tristan?
Absolutely. Let's move on to the next question. When choosing a deployment option, what is the most economical? Appliance, TDI, or
that's also, we were just talking about designing a roadmap that's company specific, and here you know, the same can be said. It depends on how you plan to utilize infrastructure. It depends on how you plan to utilize you know, the solutions that are available to you. So if we quantify economics and break things down into a little bit more granular than just appliance, TDI, and cloud, you know, there's the in-source model, a hosted model, a cloud model, and then there's appliance and TDI. And the relevance there is, if you're focused on, you know, let's say, and I won't get super detailed here, but in a CapEx model, your ROI and your expectations are going to be different, and the way you use money, quite frankly, is going to be different. Whereas if you're more in an OpEx model, again, you're looking at it from the perspective of what resources am I using when. And the reality is it varies. It's all over the board. So we can show models that identify different scenarios, let's say hosted, appliance-based versus cloud TDI model or in-source TDI model. So you really need to walk through the exercise and interact. Again, we can facilitate that process, but interact in order to really get down to a budgetary bottom line that says, okay, this particular model is going to become more economical for you. And quite frankly, because this question comes up so frequently, HPE and Symmetry have worked together directly in order to create kind of a guide that outlines, or at least as high level, will present some of the materials for you so that we can have a baseline. But again, it's company specific, and we need to walk through and talk to those points specifically.
In some of those some of those points, and we go over them in the guide. From a straight cost perspective, if you were looking at it, you have to think about what you're going to be looking at. From an appliance perspective, remember, appliances only focus on the database itself. They don't focus on, in the BW world, if you need an SLT server and the app servers, they're not included in that. Those are additional costs. But in the cloud model, of course, you've got to provide in a complete infrastructure, and TDI as well. Who's performing the services to get this integration done? If you're ordering the piece parts, who's putting it all together? So that's what we go through in the guide, is really, if you're comparing apples to apples, you have to have all the cost components. And then the other things that I'd say that are very important to look at, you know, when you say what's most economical, what's your target? I mean, as far as deployment date, your availability, your SLA, and how much experience do you have in deploying this today? Because if you're not new to HANA, then those things can be answered quite easily. But if you've got a roadmap where your business users need to be live in 6 months, and you don't know anything about the infrastructure, or even training on the user features of the software, you've got a tough task ahead of you, and you might miss your dates and those types of things. And if you rush it, you're going to pay a lot more money for services typically. So that's what we go into in the guide, is what are your goals, what's your SLA objective, and what's your experience, and then we can go into the costs and kind of lay that out, and we can walk you all the way through from here's a piece part build it yourself model all the way into fully managed in the cloud. And obviously, if you do it for a living in the cloud, you can get pretty economical. Depends on how much shared infrastructure you can manage with, or how much needs to be split off as a one-off. If it's more of a one-off, it's going to mirror more of what you can do in your own data center for your own company.
Yeah, that sounds great. Oh.
And just before you move on, Kristen, we've got a couple more questions, but I do see questions popping into the open forum piece. We will definitely address, but we'll get through the one or two generic questions, just kind of expand on some of the responses and go right into those. So bear with us for a few more minutes, and we'll get through and move on to your specific questions. Please keep them coming.
Yeah, no, excellent. Thank you so much. And there are some really good questions coming in. So this might be a good time, too, to just regroup a little bit. Kevin, you had touched on our relationship Symmetry has with HPE, but maybe we can elaborate a little bit more on our SAP HANA Cloud solution and why we partner together to deliver a HANA Cloud.
Sure. That's actually, it's a common question as well, because you know, SAP released HANA really back about 2010, and you know, Symmetry, being a certified partner, wanted to make sure we maintained pace and jumped right in, and started doing our evaluations and digging through you know, available equipment out there, what SAP was going to provide support for, who was going to hit the market first, and who had, quite frankly, the best product, so most reliable product, most flexible product, and one where we had the opportunity to interact with developers and with people and compare notes and discuss and debate ways of deploying a solution. And quite frankly, HP did that. They answered every question along the way, affirmatively, how we were going to interact, how their interactions with SAP occurred, and quite frankly, they had a solution that offered us much more flexibility from the perspective of, in a cloud, how we could compartmentalize and keep multiple customers separated, but also how we could provide bigger systems in a scale-up model, and certainly provide the flexibility from, you know, doing tiered things and different ways of deploying HANA and maintaining the performance metrics that we were really set out to. So quite frankly, they did the best for the most realistic dollars. And I guess Jim will talk about that more, but really the bottom line was they delivered a solution that we could utilize and provide the best solution to our customers.
And I'll just tag on to that by saying in HPE we have consistently made a large investment in SAP, and when we saw HANA coming, we were way out in front of it, spent a significant amount of money on R&D up front, and with the recent reports that I've seen from the industry analysts that you can purchase from them, we have a substantial lead in deployments for SAP HANA. We're way out ahead of all competitors, and it really shows that we're putting a significant amount of people and R&D dollars behind this to make these things stable, to give customers the best experience, and give them the choices that they want as they deploy HANA.
Great.
We have tons of big names to put behind it that haven't given us permission, but anywhere from the mac and cheese you represent through any of the products you might use, or even the discount chain stores and those types of things, we're already all over those with big HANA systems. Likewise, with all the HP infrastructure we have in our data center, we're very cautious about all HANA who we actually are allowed to give the actual. So certainly they're all referenceable, and by all means we will provide those if you're interested. But that's more of a one-off customer by customer basis.
Absolutely. All right, let's move along now to the next question. What are the most commonly overlooked technical or support requirements I should be aware of?
That's a good question too. I think from the first perspective, we already touched on one of the biggest ones, and that is the migration project itself. You know, the concept of it being more difficult, really not. It is a project, and all projects need to be dealt with and prepared for. So that's one of the things that I hear frequently. Another common thought is, you know, can I run HANA on a server I have in my data center, or you know, can I run it just on a generic server, generic cloud workload? And albeit some of the systems, like sidecars or maybe a data mart, make themselves available readily for solutions on maybe a lesser horsepowered machine. But in general, if you're looking at ERP, if you're looking at ECC, if you're looking at Suite on HANA, if you're looking at BW and some of the bigger analytical solutions, there's a mandate, more or less, from SAP that says, you know, in order to receive production support from SAP, you're going to need to be on a certified piece of equipment, whether that's appliance or TDI, TDI model. You're also going to have certified personnel assemble that solution, and the certified personnel deploy or migrate HANA. So some of the conceptions around where HANA can live are really still constrained by SAP directly, and with good reason. I mean, this product is moving quickly and is the next greatest thing, and you know, it's a scenario where SAP wants to keep it pretty close to the vest and make sure that there's not a overbearing margin of varying solutions out there that need to be supported. So I guess to wrap that one is more, where can it live, and it needs to be in a certified solution. Likewise, you know, taking the certification concept a little bit further and talking about who can deploy, or you know, the people that are around to support it. At this point, SAP is still really dictating that you need to have certified personnel do your deployment. From the standpoint of maintenance and ongoing maintenance, granted, it's still SAP, but there are a few obvious you know, technical pieces of knowledge that need to be gained. And so right now, I think out in the market, it's a big deal that you want to go to a certified provider, or a provider that has some solutions incorporated with service management, because HANA is a different animal. And granted, it's growing, and it's maintaining or growing momentum, and you know, more and more people are learning and becoming familiarized with how to manage and maintain it, but it's still an evolving product. So there's a learning curve there. And I think the last one is really kind of related to everything we just talked about here, but when you think of an existing system, a disk-driven database supported system, sizing and growth is kind of easy to capture because you just add disk or add some data files and you can grow your database and continue transactionally and moving forward without any issues. On the other hand, because HANA is a little bit different, the sizing is really, really important, because if you're going to build in one or the other certain model, if you're insourcing and you're going to have Suite on HANA, you're going to have BDEV, whatever it is you put there, you want to make sure you take into consideration a few extra years of growth, because you don't want to invest in an appliance today and a year from now, because your environment grew, have to buy another one because it's kind of starting from scratch, or there's downtime, you create an extra project. There's all sorts of supporting reasons behind it. So sizing is really a big deal, and it also lends itself towards one of the areas of consideration when we're talking about what is the most economical for customers, because there's a good play for going with some of the bigger HP systems that you can find in the cloud and basically turn your system down, adjust resource allocation, and turn it back up and achieve and accomplish really the pay-as-you-grow type model. So in any case, I think sizing is one of the other commonly overlooked things out there.
I think I'll add 2 points to that. From a overlooked technical and support requirements, I will say that while most people in the Unix world were slower to refresh their SAP environments, and maybe they got a little bit faster in the Linux world as they moved to Linux or Windows world, 3 years is an eternity in HANA time. And the reason it's an eternity is for the reasons I mentioned before, the fast obsolescence created by SAP's memory to processor ratios and the way that they change. So if you go from a ½ terabyte for a 4-socket server to 2 terabytes in a same 4-socket server, you can imagine what the data center compression looks like, in just less than 3 years. You're talking about half of the hardware footprint. So whether you did it on premise or you do it in a data center through a cloud provider, there's some forced obsolescence there because the economics don't work out so well. To keep that hardware beyond 3 years is really going to cost you a lot in general expenses for heating and cooling and space in a data center, whether it's yours or anybody else's. So I'd say that you shouldn't be looking at more than about a 3-year life for hardware when it comes to doing SAP HANA for those reasons. And then the other thing I'd say that people overlook is the general care and feeding tasks associated with running HANA. Availability is certainly a function of how well you run the administrative tasks and making sure you're patching regularly, applying security patches, which seem to be coming out more and more frequently nowadays. But because HANA's relationship between memory and the persistent layer is so important, the vetting of the compatibility of firmware and security patches and OS levels and HANA SBS levels are extremely important. And if you try to do that in isolation, you sometimes find out that you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. You need to apply a security patch, but it might not be ready. So getting someone to vet those things out for you is of critical importance to make sure that you have availability and you don't find out that you've just applied something that's not compatible with what SAP released.
Okay, sounds good. And let's move on then to the last question here. Why can't I deploy SAP HANA on my existing infrastructure or use any cloud provider?
So obviously this question is frequently asked, and so that's why it became part of our initial delivery or touch points. On one hand, the easy answer would be you can. On the other hand, there's a whole bunch of reasons why you can't or you shouldn't. So the first point is to determine what HANA is going to be doing for you. So, as an example, if we build a sidecar and we're going to export a single program or a single function module and have HANA create a solution that is going to enhance and speed up, quite frankly, the manipulation of data for just that small piece, then maybe you don't need tons of resources. But when you think about it, if that's the purpose behind why you're exporting that solution is you're trying to achieve performance goals, you want to make sure that you get a pretty stout machine. And HANA comes in sizes, and granted they're a little bit t-shirt sizey, but comes in sizes all the way down to 64 gigs of memory. So you can get some smaller solutions that could probably achieve not only the cost targets, but also the performance targets. On the other hand, if you're looking at some of the bigger solutions, or if you're looking at putting Suite on HANA, you run into a situation just much like what Jim was talking about earlier. There's a requirement for total capacity of memory. There's a requirement for ratio of memory to CPU, and maybe you won't have enough CPU or even enough memory in your machine. And then certainly things like persistent storage. You're going to want to have an infrastructure that can maintain pace with the IOPS, because your memory is going to flush to disk regularly. So there's constraints, and there's things that, again, HPE and SAP have worked together in order to say, well, look, this will really achieve the goals. Now, I want to add this, though, too. You probably can get HANA to work on some other machines. Just don't let them be production. The idea of having a measurement, so KPIs and programs that SAP delivers to actually to measure what your deployment will operate and function like, those tools are available. So it's important to kind of view as, well, I know my production solution may end up in a completely certified appliance, but my devs and queues and my other solutions that may not be the primary focus can be living and residing somewhere else. So there's a way, and again, these are things that we talk about when we do our evaluation, our client-specific measurements, and our kind of road mapping customer by customer. So maybe that's a little bit kludgy answer, but the idea is production certification for SAP support, and otherwise we'll help you figure out how to cram as much stuff on a single HANA system as possible.
I'll add on to that with, you've got early customers got into this and didn't do all the care and feeding and the regular analysis and administration that should have been done on some of these systems, and what they found out was if you don't treat HANA as a holistic solution and you treat it more as the individual parts, you end up with some possible issues, and those issues would mean if the in-memory database doesn't have the ability to send the data to the persistent layer, obviously that handshake isn't made and the system comes down. They have to work through the storage, through the in-memory, through the internal network, and touch that persistent storage regularly to give the persistent layer its data. And then also involved in there are a series of loggings and things that happen, and if you don't have someone that knows HANA as a holistic system, you might be monitoring hardware. All the lights are on and the hardware working fine, but HANA is no longer running. Your systems are no longer running, and maybe Solution Manager could tell you that straight from a SAP software perspective, but a holistic solution is much better, and a holistic support capability is so much better in doing that. The other thing that people that are specific to SAP do, whereas as opposed to a regular cloud provider that doesn't do SAP, is your monitoring tools might not monitor down to individual patch levels and security patches. You almost need something that can sniff out and find compatibilities and areas of potential problems before you get into something. So, boy, I want to apply this patch, but if you already know from your monitoring tools what's in the environment, you can ward off those possible issues by saying, well, we're not quite ready to get to SPS 11 because we can't hit that yet.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. So certainly in Symmetry's cloud, we've got a ton of equipment. We've got a ton of test or demo or proof of concept type HANA environments that represent all sorts of different pieces, different segments of the SAP application. And one of the things we do, and quite frankly, I can share with you an item for DSP 11 today, had to make an adjustment for a customer, and quite frankly, we had to backdate or take a step back on the patch level, because the patch level it satisfied one of the issues, and it was a performance optimization issue for MRP, quite frankly, and it created a whole nother problem where there was a bunch of disconnects. Well, subsequently, upon identifying that and identifying the solution, we rolled that out to the other, the large group of customers that we're not going to apply that patch to across the rest of our HANA deployment. So, having kind of the ability to do testing, to have visibility into different areas and different angles and different support models for HANA, and having, I guess, the certifications expertise to kind of do preventative and proactive type maintenance is really a big deal. And again, no sales intended here, but sort of intended. You can find it here. And I think, Kristen, we've got quite a few questions to go through. So, Jimmy, you ready to?
Sure.
I think we can move on to some of those if you like. I've got a few here, but Kristen, why don't you go ahead and start off?
Okay, sure. So if everyone, if you have any questions at this point, you can type them into your question and answer function on your webinar sidebar. Kevin, do you want to just read them and kind of go through them as they come in?
Sure. I think I'll start off with a licensing. This one kind of talks about the financial model. So one of the users asked, is there, do a comparison for the licensing model, or how does HANA's licensing model compare to my current platform? And I'll leave the current platform out, but it's a non-SAP database. Let's just say that. The bottom line is this. SAP over the years has interacted and worked with their very, very large group of customers in different ways. So some customers may purchase their database licensing separate from SAP licensing. Some customers may purchase it together. And some customers may have multiple database licenses built into that model. So when it comes to licensing HANA, and when it comes to SAP on HANA, I would offer this. The model is similar. So there's a SAP HANA license, and there's an SAP license that need to be addressed. The overall dollars and cents, that's customer by customer, customer specific. And I think, it's important to know that if you're switching databases or switching models, get a handle on it. Make SAP aware, hey, I'm going to be switching platform, or hey, I'm just going to be migrating to HANA as early and as quickly as possible, because it does take a little bit of time inside of their systems in order to make those adjustments. And I guess so yeah, it's a similar model, and I hesitate to address the dollars and cents because it is customer specific.
Sure. We did get another question. Oh.
Go ahead.
What are the migration options available, and which do you prefer?
So I guess migration options, there's really, two large groups. So one is kind of a two-step process. The other is kind of an optimized process. So the model for two-step, which is not my preferred, basically has requirements that you build into your current system, whether that's kernel level, whether that's enhancement pack level, support pack stack level, and you get your system into a place where then you are prepared and optimized and ready to actually make the migration to HANA. So it's kind of a two-step process. The advantage of that model is timings. If your organization is comfortable with having adjustments made in the system that are fairly short, somewhat painless, do require some regression testing, but it's not as lengthy of a migration, this would be the model for you. So it's a two-step process. One, to get your systems prepared for, and then they become usable for a period of time until it's the time to migrate to HANA. The other option is called, well, it's more or less the database option. So there is a method by which you can do migration from almost, and I put in air quote, almost any version of SAP directly to HANA. Generally, the project is longer because even though you're collecting and consolidating a lot of the steps, and certainly creating a scenario where you're only doing one true regression testing mold, you're still doing all of the kind of two-step process. It just looks like one step. So those are really the two biggies. When it comes to creating data marts and sidecars, it's kind of a separate exercise where you're doing exports and imports and configurations and things. And those we generally view as, you know, they're projects, but they're smaller projects, and generally can be created in a scenario where you really minimize any impact in the production environment until it's really go live time. And so we don't, you know, I don't necessarily have a preference in that one because there are definitely ways that we don't have to interfere with any productive activity.
Great. Another question just came in. I'm sorry.
I said sorry for the windy answer, but there you have it.
Oh, no, that was great information. How does moving to HANA change the role from DBA in a standard database scenario? Is there a clear separation between basis and DBA?
I'll start with that one. I know you're going to have a comment or two on that. So the short answer is yes and no. I mean, obviously HANA is still a database. So if your organization is separated into, you know, you keep the two functions separate, a DBA and a basis administrator or an SAP administrator, you know, there's obviously going to be a learning curve. There's pieces of the puzzle that are very, very specific, except the tools are different. So, you know, your DBA function might be, well, I'm going to optimize or I'm going to tune for specific applications, or I'm going to make adjustments in the profile to make HANA operate differently. But you also might add things like, well, now you're also responsible for data replication, or you're also responsible for the storage. You know, there's going to be some additional functions and operations that maybe wouldn't have been part of your role in the past. And then certainly the tools within SAP have been modified as well. So the role still exists, but the tool sets and maybe the activities you do in the organization be slightly different. Jim?
Yeah, I'm not an expert in DBA versus basis. You know, I know the functions, but I can say from a DBA perspective, the in-memory components can be a little bit different. I still see that there's overlap in those functions. You know, some of the things that we do, obviously, on the hardware side is trying to make it as simple as possible for people to deploy test environments and things in a rapid fashion, and you could look at that and say that's a straight basis job. But you know, if you're if you're a DBA, then are you responsible for deploying the database portion of what environment the basis person stands up for you? So I don't really know the segregation of duties that well to be able to do that.
I would also outline something there as well, because I mentioned earlier the certifications for deployment of HANA, and there's a little bit of a different line, and I'll explain that. So in the past, if you looked at or thought about basis as kind of, network stack, infrastructure stack, operating system, database, SAP, and then functional activities kind of as a simplified stack. In this day and age, deploy HANA, you really end up doing it a little bit differently, where maybe the engineer who deployed the operating system and manipulated and configured and patched it and made sure it was HANA ready might also be installing the database. And then the basis people will be maybe deploying the SAP portion and attaching it to HANA. So there are a little bit, the lines, the swim lanes are a little bit different, but the function and the role still exist.
Did we address the question start from the top or no?
I don't know. I think they're not coming in sequential order, so.
There's a question up there from Tim that asked, what's the appliance do that's separate from a regular server for a sidecar deployment? Sure. And the quick answer is it's an appliance comes preloaded with software and fully configured, so it's faster to deploy. That's a database only. And then you get guaranteed performance because you don't have to go through the certification process. It's already done for you. There's nothing to do. There's nothing to send in, and there's nothing to run to test the performance. And then it comes with a higher level of support typically out of the box, as opposed to having to review it to get you a higher level of support. So, like when we, and quite frankly, we'll say, when HP ships to Symmetry's cloud to put stuff in when they need it rocking and ready, it's shipped as an appliance, and it rolls into their data center, and it's ready to go.
Plug it in and turn it on.
Yep.
The other thing too, we manage customers that have sidecars in AWS, for example, and the infrastructure there is a little bit different. It's certainly different than the infrastructure in our data center, and it's a scenario where some workloads, they belong in different locations or have different tolerance, different ways to actually become productive. So, and we manage that for our customers. So it's a scenario where, going through the roadmap, having the discussions about economically and performance-wise what makes the most amount of sense, and then who's going to manage it, where it's going to live, all that kind of stuff, and what servers it's going to be on. It's a case-by-case basis. It's an application-specific basis, and we more than happy to walk through that exercise with everyone to say, look, here, and quite frankly, show you dollars and cents for that. So the answer to the question is, depending on what you're going to deploy on HANA will determine where it lives, and depending on what type of support you need for HANA will also determine whether it can be on a certified or non-certified server. And if you care about, the reality of getting a HANA system running on a non-certified piece of equipment, it can be done. It's just what your expectation is for performance and to some degree data integrity. There's a certain threshold that you're asking too much of the hardware and it just can't keep up, versus it can't keep up and might end up stomping on data or not writing logs quick enough, or some strange scenario. So that's why SAP goes through the rigorous testing with HPE to really prove those systems out and say, look, here's where we'll support this, and outside of that, it's really a support model issue. All right, what do we got? Next one. So another good question about ways to deploy HANA, and if HANA HANA, multiple applications can be delivered on HANA or on a HANA system. So unfortunately, I don't have it in this presentation, but I have slides that show all the different ways to deploy HANA, whether that's multiple HANA systems on a single appliance or a single machine, whether that's multi-tenancy HANA system, or whether that's multiple applications attached to a single HANA environment. There's several. There's more beyond that. So the short answer to can multiple applications be delivered on HANA, single HANA? Yes. Usually what happens is we do an evaluation to say, well, it makes more sense to combine certain things. So process orchestration, the gateway, MII, Solutions Manager, and others. You know, HANA Live may go well with some of them, but may not with others. And so we kind of go through the exercise and say, well, maybe it makes sense to run 2 or 3 on one HANA system and create another HANA system to run the other 2 and 3, but do that all on one piece of equipment. So the short answer is yes, that can be done.
Kevin, have we referenced where to find that information?
There are a couple of places. There's a presentation on Symmetry site that actually does point out OSS notes and references to where you can find combinations of things that will work together. And if not, we can go through the exercise. Right now, with the volume of documentation and the volume of notes that SAP is generating that are really HANA specific, there's a whole lot to capture.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Jim, too. There's a lot more detailed information about our HANA solution and our cloud and all that good stuff on Symmetry's website, symmetrycorp.com. So, okay, we have another question that just came in, too. Kevin, do you want to take that one from Robert?
Sure. So let's see.
It's from an appliance. You want me to take that?
Yeah.
So from a straight appliance perspective, because it's an appliance and the way that HP has worked with SAP in developing the support structure, you can do either one. If you call HP directly, HP can actually open a ticket with SAP. We're in the same building in Waldorf, so it can be done either way. So a lot of times, if you don't know if it's hardware or software, you think you might have a hardware issue, you can call SAP. I'm sorry, if you think you have a hardware issue, you call HP, and if it needs to be triaged and both tickets created simultaneously, we can create the ticket for you through HP. And that's the same type of, Symmetry is an HP customer, but also a fantastic hosting provider. They do the same thing, and one thing that Symmetry insists on is making sure that they get that holistic support from HP to back them up for things that is related to specifically to HP hardware. And sometimes they'll go to SAP directly, and sometimes they'll go through our holistic support.
Yeah, that's a great question. But also, part of the reason why we go through the painstaking efforts of maintaining our certifications and our partnerships with SAP, and certainly around HANA, is really to be able to get fast access, facilitate a situation like this. So, whether it's in your data center, whether it's in in a cloud somewhere, whether it's however it's deployed, we can certainly be a partner to facilitate that and get some expedited action from SAP directly. So the short answer is call Symmetry or call HP, and we'll facilitate getting connected to SAP.
Absolutely. Kevin, there's another question that just came in. Do you want to take a look at that one?
Okay. So the next question is, please explain your strategy to deal with ABAP remediation. And the strategy is twofold. So much like we were talking about the partnership we have with SAP and the partnership we have with HP, we also have partnerships for functional activities and for development type roles, whether it's project-based or whether it's whether it's part of a ongoing support model. And so in this particular case, when we're going through an exercise of doing a migration, and I had mentioned earlier the project, post-processing always requires some sort of testing and regression, evaluation of whether code still works and what needs to be modified. We partner for those scenarios, and we have multiples and generally interact with the customers. Okay, well, we're going to provide the technical expertise, and we're going to make recommendations, 3 to 5 recommendations, or incorporate, someone that each customer may know or maybe even have purchased software from, and work with those to consolidate our project, and then create a model where we're going to have one single point of contact that's going to coordinate the activities,